Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to start our meeting. We miss the Irish Minister. He is in the building. Ich möchte in meine Muttersprache wechseln.
I'd like to switch to my mother tongue. We've got interpretation into languages available. I'd like to welcome you all most warmly to our discussion, our hearing today. We have 4 European Ministers of Finance with us. At this meeting, as in all previous meetings, it's possible to follow our proceedings online. French, German, Italian, Dutch, Spanish, Finnish and English, of course, are the languages available. I'm very pleased to welcome the ministers. And the first speaker will be Dr. Wolfgang Schäuble, Germany. He's been Federal Minister of Finance since 2009. Prior to that, he was responsible for Home Affairs and head of the Chancellor's Office. So, Dr. Schäuble, we're delighted to see you here in the PANA Committee. The youngest member is still to come. The next minister I shall welcome is Dr. Piercarlo Paduan from Italy, minister since 2014. He was also active in the OECD and in many international bodies prior to that. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Jeroen Dijsselbloem from the Netherlands, finance minister since 2002. And as of 2012 rather, and as of 2013 he's been head of the Euro Group, re-elected, and his mandate comes to an end in January 2018. You are all most welcome. I'd like to thank you all. Here's the missing minister. And now we've got a tight timetable. And I know that you are all very busy people, and thank you very much for having come along to discuss these issues with us: money laundering, tax avoidance and tax evasion. So we have the new Irish Minister. You're most welcome, sir. Pascal Donoghue from Ireland. He's been Finance Minister since June 2017, but he's occupied a number of positions in government from 2013 onwards. So he's new in this particular office, but not new to government. So again, a cordial welcome to the ministers and their assistants. I see state secretaries, heads of department who've done preparatory work on this too. Here in the PANA Committee, we've had a mandate now for a year, and our terms of reference mean that we have organised a number of events over that space of time. We've had a plethora of public hearings. We've had a studies commission, fact-finding visits to the USA, UK, Portugal, Cyprus also on the list. And we have access to files, and that is something to be discussed. And as of yesterday, we have the draft report from our 2 rapporteurs, Jeppe Kofod, S&D from Denmark, and Peter Jacek, Oldie from the Czech Republic. And we had our first discussion of that draft report yesterday. I recollect that a number of these individuals, particularly Mr. Schäuble, were here in Tax 1 and Tax 2 and in analogous hearings, and I have very fond memories of that, together with our colleague Mr. Lamassoure. But we didn't find the sort of acceptance we have from you today in Council, invariably. People didn't necessarily accept our invitations, and one of our problems was the Council Legal Service here in Brussels. they advised certain member states, particularly the Maltese presidency, to take a rather reluctant attitude towards invitations and requests for information, which we weren't delighted about. Now, the Committee of Inquiry, we don't have the kind of powers that certain national committees of inquiry do. We can't apply sanctions, penalties, for example. So in Luxembourg, we can't command people, summon people to come and see us. Now, in Luxembourg, it was difficult to insist on the attendance of those involved in the PANA papers in the past. Now, we've got an extension of our mandate until December. And in October, November, we will come up with our recommendations and our definitive report. There is a problem. That is, we've come across differing issues under current legislation. I don't want to comment on the principle of unanimity in tax matters in the EU, but there are positive developments with international exchange of information when it comes to country-by-country reporting, the fourth anti-money laundering directive, and a new proposal on intermediaries and their commitments and liabilities in relation to money laundering. And then, of course, we have the tax base as well. Now, we have the blacklist of tax havens. We haven't seen eye to eye with the Commission on this because the Commission's official view is that it ought to be available later in the year, but it cannot cover jurisdictions out with the European Union, and that's something we're going to continue to discuss. But I'd like to thank you once again most warmly for your attendance here, and I suggest that we proceed alphabetically by country. So we're going to start with Dr. Wolfgang Schäuble from Germany, Federal Minister of Finance. If you can manage it in 5 minutes, we'd appreciate that. Dr. Schäuble, you are the first to address the committee.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, it's always a tremendous pleasure and privilege to address the European Parliament. In Europe and internationally, the federal government has been campaigning for more tax transparency. In the wake of the revelations about the PO box companies in Panama, the federal government made a proposal to the member states and called on Panama to cooperate with tax authorities and to participate in automatic exchange of financial information. Panama has made progress thanks to pressure through the OECD. We now have a competent authority agreement initialed on the 14th of June this year between Germany and Panama. Under this agreement, the international standards for customer data exchange is going to be put into practice. These standards have to be properly implemented, and this will be part of the OECD Global Forum. Since the publication of the Panama Papers, the EU has taken measures against tax avoidance and tax evasion. The Council has begun work on a list of 16 non-cooperating states. The aim of the list is to encourage those states to begin to cooperate. Zero-rate jurisdictions like Bahamas and Bermuda should, in Germany's view, be pressured into not allowing companies to avoid paying tax. We are in favour of transparency. We are in favour of improving the code of conduct to prevent unfair tax competition. Reporting by this group to ECOFIN should be expanded. There's more to do. A number of measures have been taken in the field of the fight against money laundering on the basis of partly on the basis of recommendations from the European Parliament. Germany has implemented the fourth money laundering directive just in time. It took effect on the 26th of June. As part of the implementing law, we've set up a transparency register to list the companies involved, and we have tightened the sanctions, the penalties for money laundering. We have a new unit with new powers and more human resources, a unit that is now with customs, used to be with the police, and we believe that this is more appropriate in terms of achieving greater efficiency. To ensure money laundering surveillance in the financial sector, we have strengthened the financial regulator. We are preparing for implementing things like the customer registers in the fourth money laundering directive, and we have a new law of the 23rd of June on preventing tax avoidance and tax evasion. And this is in particular in relation to third country companies. The financial administration will have enhanced powers in the case of accounts being opened and in the field of account monitoring. Money laundering and tax evasion cannot be tolerated. We will continue to try to root it out, and in the EU, in the G20 process, in the OECD, as part of the G20 presidency, we shall work resolutely in taking further steps in this direction. Thank you.
Schäuble.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Schäuble. Thank you, Minister, for your presentation of what Germany has done to date. I'd like to move on straight away. We agreed on alphabetical order. We're now moving to Ireland. Pascal Donoghue, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good afternoon, members, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the committee for their invitation to appear this afternoon, along with my fellow ministers. This committee has taken on a very wide mandate across tax, anti-money laundering and other areas. And I know, Chairman, that the committee's draft recommendations published last week do indeed cover a wide range of matters. So I would firstly like to outline the Irish response to the Panama Papers themselves. Secondly, I want to discuss Ireland's commitment to exchange of tax information and to international cooperation on tax issues. And then finally, I will comment on Ireland's actions in the area of anti-money laundering. So if I may begin with our response to the Panama Papers. The information contained in these papers had very limited connection to Ireland. Nonetheless, whenever any such information becomes available, the Irish Tax Authority, or the Revenue Commissioner, examines this information to decide whether Irish tax has been avoided and whether to challenge the tax planning arrangements. Ireland is committed to making the fullest possible use of any available information to pursue cases where it appears that tax liabilities have not been addressed, and the number of inquiries have been initiated arising from the examination and the analysis of the Panama Papers data. And this work is ongoing. Following the publication of these papers, we introduced new legislation last year to prevent taxpayers who use offshore schemes from availing of reduced penalties under our voluntary disclosure regime. To encourage taxpayers who may have used such arrangements in the past to come forward, taxpayers were given until the 4th of May of this year to make disclosures under the voluntary disclosure regime. Those that failed to come forward by that date face greater penalties, publication of their names and possible prosecution. I am advised that the number of disclosures made before the 4th of May exceeds 2,500 disclosures, and they have a value of more than €70 million. And our tax authorities are now examining all of the disclosures received in greater and further detail. The Irish Revenue Commissioner are also fully engaged with the OECD Joint International Task Force on shared intelligence and cooperation, and we will continue to play a full part in agreeing concrete actions that tax administrations can take in response to evidence of tax avoidance or erosion. I want to take this opportunity to state that Ireland is a strong supporter of the work done in recent years to increase the exchange of information between tax authorities. Remarkable progress has been made at OECD and EU level to extend the automatic exchange of information to include financial account information, country-by-country reports and tax opinions and rulings. This new information will play a vital role in improving the ability of tax authorities to carry out risk assessment and to target audits and interventions. It will also help to reassure citizens that everyone is paying their fair share. To have a functioning tax system, justice must be done and seem and appear to be done. More broadly than just exchange of information, we are a strong supporter of international tax reform efforts. The issue of aggressive tax planning by multinational companies is a global problem requiring a global solution. The agreement of the OECD BEPS report was a very important step, and the focus must now be on implementation. We were one of the first countries in the world to introduce country-by-country reporting to tax authorities. The agreement of the Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive by all Member States was another significant step towards the implementation of the BEPS reports. This offers a multilateral instrument, which was another global milestone, to provide the mechanism for extensive changes to tax treaties globally. We were one of the first countries to sign this instrument at the first signing ceremony in Paris, and I am supportive of the Commission proposal for all countries to introduce mandatory disclosure rules, and I hope that agreement can be reached on this directive, because we remain convinced that consistent global action is the best way to achieve a fair and transparent global tax system. With regards to anti-money laundering, a whole-of-government approach is being adopted. Ireland has an anti-money laundering steering committee, which is chaired by a senior official in my department and is comprised of representatives from the relevant agencies, including the Financial Intelligence Unit of our National Police Force, An Garda Síochána, the Revenue Commissioners and the state competent authorities. This steering committee is responsible for policy making and implementation and anti-money laundering matters. We are in the process of transposing the 4th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, and we are committed to strengthening transparency over who ultimately owns and controls companies and trusts to effectively detect, disrupt and prevent money laundering and terrorist financing. We will establish the central register of beneficial ownership information for both companies and trusts as provided for under this directive. I am aware that the 5th Anti-Money Laundering Directive, which is currently being discussed at trilogue, has proposed amendments to these beneficial ownership provisions, and my officials are engaging constructively on these matters. So in closing, Chairman, I want to thank you and your committee for the invitation to meet you here today, and I look forward to an engaging discussion. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. I know it's your first appearance in the European Parliament in your new functions, so we're very pleased that you've accepted our invitation. And I now call on Professor Piercarlo Paduan from Italy. You have the floor, Minister.
Signor Presidente, illustri
Mr. Chairman, members of the European Parliament, I'm very happy to be here today, and I'd like to thank you for your invitation to discuss the problem of combating money laundering and tax evasion and tax avoidance. These are extremely important elements that have to be coordinated and shared at the national, the European and international level, and Italy is committed to this. I'd like to mention some of the initiatives that Italy has been carrying forth. As the president of having the chair of the G7 this year, in May we promoted the adoption of the declaration for combating tax fraud and tax crimes. This stresses the improvement of cooperation between the national competent authorities and the role of intermediaries, who, as we've seen from the Panama Papers, do play an essential role in setting up schemes aimed at avoiding and evading taxes and committing tax frauds. We are convinced in our support of the Commission's directives of the obligation for disclosure between intermediaries and the exchange of information between tax authorities. We believe that it is essential to involve developing countries in this as well. And that's why Italy, with Germany, who holds the chair of the G20 this year, have supported the setting up in Kenya the Africa Academy for Tax and Financial Crime investigation with a contribution in funds and technical assistance in manpower. In order to combat terrorism, the Italian chair of the G7 has set up a map of the different, of all the information, the tax information of the 7 countries, and assessing also the various barriers to the exchange of information that can develop. Within the framework of the OCDE G20 meetings, Italy supports the BEPS and has supported with the other countries last June the multilateral convention for the BEPS agreement, which is one of the essential tools for applying some of the recommendations of the BEPS project. And the European framework during the Italian presidency in the second half of 2014, the idea of an EU BEPS agenda was launched. In less than 3 years, 2 anti-avoidance tax directives have been adopted, and 3 directives on transparency and automatic exchange of tax information, exchange of rulings, and for tax avoidance. As far as money laundering is concerned, Italy has concluded the negotiation on the 4th directive on money laundering, which makes the investigations a lot more efficient, and also the roles of professionals involved. Italy, with the role of anti-money laundering, is one of the most advanced countries today. We're talking about imposing on all the member states a list of all the types of all accounts. In Italy, we have that. In 2015, Italy also put in the crime of self-laundering, and this is used mainly for combating tax evasion at the domestic level. Many initiatives have been set up to combat tax evasion and certifying compliance, involving the taxpayers, administrators too, and and also a greater certainty of the law. We have a programme of voluntary disclosure, the first in 2015. The second one is ongoing and will conclude in September this year. Another is the regime of the cooperative compliance regime that was set up in 2015 and allows setting up an early dialogue between the tax authorities and the taxpayer, allows for sharing the tax information, and also agreements on the treatment of taxing of certain activities that do have an impact on companies. Now, a couple of points on the future. First of all, we must progress on the draft directive on the basis of a common consolidated corporate tax, the CCCTB, common rules for the tax base of corporations, which would avoid unethical and different types of tax levels. We approve what Estonia has said, approving the digitalization to set up the single digital market, which we support. We must also harmonise the international laws when we see the level of business which has increased due to digitalisation, and looking at an increase of the profits. Secondly, we must also give a priority on the beneficial ownership of legal entities as trusts, partnerships, in order to improve access to information. The publication of the Panama Papers have shown how urgent it is to progress on this. Then, in the negotiations, in the amendments to the fourth directive, we've mentioned also the cooperation between the Financial Information Unit and strengthening the capacity to have access to the data of intermediaries and other people involved. It is also important to see the promotion of a greater cooperation in the sector, combating the financing of terrorism. Thank you for your attention.
Vielen Dank, Herr Minister Paduan.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister Paduan. I will move straight on at this stage and invite Jeroen Dijsselbloem from the Netherlands to address the committee.
Thank you very much, Chair. Dear members of the PANA Committee, thank you for inviting me and my colleagues to discuss with you today the important issue of tax fraud, tax evasion, tax avoidance and money laundering. The international publication of the Panama Papers has of course shown how widespread tax evasion is. And we cannot allow criminal activities to be left unpunished and multinational companies escape paying their fair share in taxes. And to be quite frank, for too long the Netherlands has been part of this problem. And over the past few years we have been part of a process taking important steps to fight tax fraud, tax evasion, tax avoidance and money laundering. And with taking these steps, I hope that we can become once again part of the solution. So today I will first reflect on some of the international initiatives and then say something about unilateral steps that we took in the Netherlands. On the basis of the OECD BEPS project, in a record time within the EU, directives have been agreed and are being put in place. During our presidency, the Dutch presidency, we reached a council agreement on the Anti-Tax Avoidance Directive, ATAD, on country-by-country reporting between tax authorities, quickly followed by an agreement on fighting hybrid mismatches with third countries. This ATAD 2 directive also puts an end to the Dutch so-called CVBV, which was often used by American multinationals, taking advantage of US regulations and avoiding paying taxes in the US, but also in Europe. A couple of weeks ago, we reached the latest landmark of the OECD BEPS project in Paris. A lot of my colleagues and I signed the multilateral instrument. And in the Netherlands, we are working on the broadest possible implementation in all the tax treaties of this instrument. And I would like to call on other countries to do the same, make the full use of this multilateral instrument. It's the best way to fight tax evasion. Currently, 2 proposals are being discussed in Council that contribute to further transparency. the proposal for public country-by-country reporting, and the proposal for mandatory disclosure. And I hope we can make quick progress with both proposals. The Netherlands supports public country-by-country reporting, and although we are positive about disclosure of aggressive tax planning arrangement, we are still assessing the Commission proposal that was only recently published. That brings me to tax fraud and tax evasion. I believe that more transparency between countries is the best way forward here, and I would like to mention some important steps. The Common Reporting Standards calls on jurisdictions to obtain information from their financial institutions and automatically exchange that information with other jurisdictions. A legislative proposal for a public register with information on ultimate beneficial owners will be presented to our national parliament in the fall. A legislative proposal for lifting the anonymity of bearer shares is also in preparation in the Netherlands. Internationally, we have an active role to play in the context of FATF with regard to, for example, the issue of making available beneficial ownership information. And in an EU context, we cooperate with the Presidency to speedily come to an agreement with the Parliament, the European Parliament, on the amendments to strengthen the fourth Anti-Money Laundering Directive. Also, unilaterally, we've taken a number of steps to fight tax avoidance. Let me just mention a few. We reinforced our substance requirements for companies to ensure that advantages are granted only in case of real economic activity. With 23 developing countries, we offered to include anti-abuse measures in our tax treaties, and already with 10 developing countries, these negotiations have been finalized and the anti-abuse measures have been agreed. A recent tax act regulates that individuals who hold a significant portion of the shares in a company can no longer avoid paying tax by emigrating. Also, specific measures have been announced and some already been implemented after the publication of the Panama Papers. A special team was set up to immediately start analyzing the data from the Panama Papers, resulting in the identification of a couple of hundred of Dutch taxpayers. We will terminate the voluntary disclosure arrangement. From now on, fraudulent actions will be punished. A policy document on the disclosure of fines imposed on legal professionals, intermediaries and advisors will be put to public consultation, and also published for public consultation will be 4 legislative measures which seek to tackle constructions by tax debtors that prevent the successful collection of taxes. Tax evasion by donating capital to third parties will no longer be possible. A legislative proposal with strict rules for trusts and company service providers will be presented to our parliaments after the summer, also making use of the work of a parliamentary research committee on this topic. To conclude, Mr. Chair, in 2015 the publication of the Panama Papers showed once more we should fight for a more transparent and fairer tax system. I think we've taken major steps in the last couple of years. The implementation of these measures give tax authorities and enforcement agencies a large toolkit to fight illegal behavior and ensure fair taxation, but we're not there yet. New ways to avoid taxes will always be found, so we should continue our work on this topic. I'm looking forward to the outcomes of your work. Thank you.
Vielen Dank an
Thank you very much indeed to all 4 ministers. You've given us a very interesting conspectus of the national and international pictures. We've now got a list of colleagues who have questions to our guests. We are limited in time available. I suggest we begin with the 2 rapporteurs, or co-rapporteurs, Messrs. Kofod and Jacek. Then we have a first round of answers, and after that we would take other colleagues in clusters of 3. My proposal is that you should address your questions to one minister or to all of them. You have the floor.
Chair, and welcome to the Minister. Thank you so much for appearing before our committee on this very, very important topic, which is also about building trust in our institutions, societies, again, when we talk about tax justice. You know, and it was also mentioned by several of you, that this committee has been existing for a while, and our conclusions is pretty clear. We need transparency, and we need effective cooperation and law enforcement if we want to tackle tax avoidance, tax evasion, money laundering, tax fraud, tax crimes in general. So my question, I have two questions. And the first one is looking inwards to the European Union, our single market, our partners in Europe. Isn't it high time for us also to generally reform our own work in the European Union? When it comes to the Code of Conduct Group for Business Taxation, it's been existing for 19 years now. It is supposed to phase out cross-border harmful tax regimes in Europe. It is supposed to facilitate the fight against unfair taxation. So would you like to support a reform with more transparency, maybe also getting rid of unanimity principles in this group? That would be excellent. Secondly, on the country-by-country reporting, again, disclosure, transparency is key. We saw it in the banking sector, where there's now mandatory disclosure for banks and financial institutions. It's working well. It's globally. It's all countries in the world. Why don't we also in the EU ensure that the country-by-country reporting is disclosure of all countries worldwide, not only in Europe or in tax, on jurisdictions on tax lists, but really worldwide, country by country? That type of disclosure would also help in the fight against tax avoidance and tax evasion. Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank, Jeppe. Peter.
Thanks very much, Jeppe. Peter, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, the presence of all ministers is highly appreciated here. Well, I'd start with a question to Minister Schäuble. My understanding was that after the Panama Papers revelation, the German government promised to introduce a public beneficial ownership register. And it seems that it turned out that it actually wouldn't be a register with access for the general public. So I wonder what made you change your mind. And it seems that the general public will have to wait now for the results of the ongoing revision of the anti-money laundering directive and its implementation. Well, the second question for Minister Schäuble would be also on anti-money laundering directive revision. And I'd like to ask why Germany is in favor of lighter regime for politically exposed person of the European Union in comparison to outside politically exposed person, and also to comparisons what is in the current anti-money laundering directive. Because I'm afraid that domestic PEPs are not of lower risk. Well, on AMLD revision, I'd like to ask also Minister Doneho, and it's on the public access to the register of trusts, because I understand that Ireland belongs to a minority of countries which do not want this access to trust register to be public, even not for business trusts, which are similar to companies. So I wonder whether you can comment on that. And to Mr. Dijsselbloem, I appreciate that he admitted that the Netherlands, in the area we are discussing, used to be often part of the problem. And he mentioned the issue of CVBC structures, that it will be dealt with. And I wonder whether there is a time frame or a vision how will you deal with it, if you can reveal more details. And, well, lastly, according to the report of Transparency International under the shell, Italy is one of the leading countries in the implementation of AMLD measures. So here I would just congratulate to Minister Padoan, and given the short time frame, I would leave him in peace. He has other issues on his plate anyway. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Well, that's a whole host of questions for you. Let's have the first round of answers, beginning with you, Mr. Schäuble.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The two rapporteurs, insofar as they address themselves to me, deserve the following response. The rule in Germany is that tax administration is a matter for the lender. We are a federal state, and the tax administration is not central. Tax administration is devolved, and the federal administration is not a regulator for the lender, and it's important that that's understood when you assess the debate in Germany. Secondly, in Germany, as in other countries, we have a relatively high level of protection of tax secrecy. As in all countries, we require a degree of release of data for tax purposes. The legal view is that a citizen should not reveal anything about themselves to their own detriment. There is an important distinction between criminal law and tax law in this respect. Ever since I've been finance minister, and it's been a while, I've always sought for global action to bring down the use of multiple jurisdictions, and that's the reason for BEPS, which is something that George Osborne and I kick-started in the G20. It is very difficult to reach global agreements, yet a great deal has been achieved, not least in the field of information exchange. We have automated information exchange from banks, where we have 100 jurisdictions have signed up, and others will begin at the end of this year. But also information exchange from the registers. In the G20, though, we Europeans have agreed that there should be information exchange